Val, I want to talk to you about King Lear and your excellent Connell Guide on Lear. And I want to quote to you a quote that you use in the book by D.J. Enright in his book Shakespeare and the Students. It is possible that Shakespeare never did anything more awe-inspiring, more improbable seeming than this, to take a petulant old retired monarch, drive him mad and stick flowers in his hair and still end with a figure of tragedy. I mean, I take it that you agree with Enright on that.
I mean, it is quite extraordinary, really. This comment of Enright's about how, in a sense, how kind of silly a lot of the plot, as it were, of King Lear applies to a lot of Shakespeare plays, and the stage filled with very odd things, sensational, and melodramatic, and often plain daft, and people making hay out of silly things. Poor old. All these famous stories about people shouting from the gallery to Othello, "You black fool," and so on, for being deceived by Iago. And you think, well, yes. I mean, they were quite right to think that Othello was being kind of foolish. All that fuss about a handkerchief and a man telling lies which could easily be exposed and so on. There is a lot of the ridiculous and the absurd and so on. But what is interesting and it applies, of course, to other great fiction. Some of the greatest novels in the world have equally absurd and daft and silly things, but nonetheless achieve tremendous power. We have this tremendous kind of power of this portrait, this presentation of the undoing of this nasty, in some ways, and silly old man, in parallel, of course, with his friend Gloucester, and the impacts of these parallel stories on stage is extraordinary. One. In this day and age, good old feminist time, one's not allowed to put it in quite this way, but the truth is that grown men have had to leave the theatre enduring performances of King Lear, especially the blinding of Gloucester, of course. I mean, it's unstomachable, but then so much is, and then the whole presentation of Lear's madness. This man, indeed, with flowers stuck in his hair and so on. I'm just see the sort of moral and spiritual and self degeneration of this person, even though he's brought much of it on himself and so on, is quite overwhelming. It is extraordinary, and it's no surprise, is it, that this play has been performed in all kinds of kind of terrible circumstances during the Holocaust and so on, or in Berlin after the Second World War, this kind of smashed city and so on. The idea of human ruin before our eyes, is quite overwhelming. And you might think of it as kind of a mystery. How does this happen? But it does happen, and it happens quite a lot in Shakespeare, just as it happens quite a lot in big novels.
The human ruin happens quite a lot.
Yes. Oh no, human ruin. But this impact, the impact
of an improbable plot.
Yes.
You mentioned the feminists just now. How much do you buy the feminist line, as one might call it, on Lear, which is that Goneril and Regan, essentially I suppose it is that Goneril and Regan were abused children and Cordelia was very spoilt, and therefore we can't really blame them.
I mean, what's interesting, of course, in recent times is what you may call a slantwise approach to the women in this play, and that's very important. The old tradition was to sort of rhapsodize really about the loveliness of Cordelia and the terrible thing that she dies and so on, and she was presented really as a kind of this sort of lovely person who suffers unduly and so on at the hands of an outrageously bad father. Recent discussion wants to emphasise much more how she is a pain in the neck, really. You do wonder, don't you? Why she didn't go along with her old dad and so on. I mean, you thought a kind of a good girl would, or a wiser girl would have flattered him a bit and so on, and but that would have been the end of the play, of course. So that wouldn't do. But she is in many ways kind of silly and hoity-toity and morally and so on. And when we look at her through kind of more recent spectacles, not a very likable person. The aspect of kind of recent feminist discussion that I find a bit hard to take is the attempt to present Goneril and Regan as really rather heroic, strong women, strong uprising women, in kind of resisting their father in his outrageous demands and so on. And so, scenes like when they beat poor old Lear down as to the number of kind of soldiers or assistants he can have knights he can have in the house, and they beat him down.
And of course, all these knights are made to seem very rowdy, aren't they? So we get the point in stage
we do, and modern criticism wants to emphasise the way, and that began, of course, with Peter Brook, to emphasise the awfulness of having this crowd of loud drunks and so on in your house, and so on. But that scene in which Goneril and Regan beat Lear down from 100 to 50 to 20, and then Regan producing that wonderful line, "What need one?" and so on. This I find as terrible, this kind of stripping down of poor old Lear. But a lot of feminist critics now see this as a great moment, a great moment. He brought it on himself. But at least that makes you think more than one used to do about what is going on, and I think it has to be said, I think a lot of feminist criticism has gone too far, but it has energized the whole business of Lear, especially in relation to this strong female element. And of course, there's always been lurking around in reception of Lear an interest in the way in which Lear, in a sense, becomes kind of womanized in his troubles, when he imagines in his madness that he's pregnant. Feels a kind of pain rising in him, like the mother, as it was called, allegedly the hysteria of pregnant women traditionally. Why is Lear feeling that? And feminist criticism wants to sort of stress that aspect, and to suggest that maybe that is part of the insight of Shakespeare, to actually to associate this male suffering with female suffering. And there's something in that. In other words, we have kind of a radicalisation of the play under the impact of modern criticism. And one wants to keep saying, that is actually the point of fresh eyes and fresh readings. And it is the case, it seems to me, that there's an argument about classic. What constitutes a classic? Frank Kermode, the great Frank Kermode's argument was that a classic was a text that can go on being reread. And his line, and I agree with that, if a text can no longer be reread, in fact, if it doesn't attract new readers, and as a matter of fact, new reading styles, it's over.